The Andrew Jackson Hotel, the current building here, now sits on the site of the First U.S. District Court. In 1792, the Spanish colonial government built a boys' public school on this site. After the Louisiana Purchase, it served as the first United States District Court of the Louisiana Territory. Here in 1815, after the Battle of New Orleans, General Andrew Jackson was fined $1,000 for contempt of court in a dispute following his refusal to lift martial law before confirmation of peace was received. The old building was demolished in 1888 when the present building was erected, which was in 1890. Before the current location on 919 Royal Street in the French Quarter of New Orleans, where this famous hotel was built in 1890, it is also the site where two other major historical events took place in two separate dwellings, one in 1794 and the other in 1815. The current building, now a hotel, was named in honor of a key figure in American history, Andrew Jackson, where the locals considered him not only the savior of their beloved city, but also their hero for defeating the British during the Battle of New Orleans of 1815 during the War of 1812. The battle was the last major victory fought in American history against foreign rule that secured our nation's preservation as a country against all foreign powers, forcing both Britain and Spain to accept that the Louisiana Territory belonged to the United States. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're a first-time viewer, I'm happy you found me. Be sure to subscribe, like, comment, share, and click the notifications for new content. Again, welcome, and let's get into the story. In 1792, the original building on the site became a boarding school opened by the Spanish colonial government for orphan boys who lost their parents to yellow fever. 2 years later, on December the 8th, 1794, the Second Great Fire of New Orleans burned the school to the ground, trapping 5 young boys inside that ended their lives. People claim today, because of this tragic event, that the boys, particularly one named Armand, haunt the current location today. A U.S. federal courthouse was soon built after the fire of 1794, and in 1812, our country found itself at war with Great Britain once again, known as the War of 1812 or the Second War of Independence. During the American Revolution, the War of Independence fought between 1775 to 1783, the Native Americans mostly supported British rule in hopes they would help protect their lands by restricting American settlers from expanding westward into their territories from the 13 colonies. When the American colonies won the war, settlers did begin to expand westward, which caused friction between the two societies. These actions only became worse as years went by, when settlers began traveling further west to settle the lands that threatened the indigenous people. This only caused more anguish and frustration amongst them, and the British used this to their advantage to once again encourage the Native Americans to fight back to regain their territories and to stop further expansion. When Congress found out that the British Royal Navy began using a tactic known as impressment to force U.S. merchants into service by forcing them to join their Royal Navy, it outraged them. With the U.S. relying heavily on trading overseas, Britain's ongoing tensions with France began punishing them for trading with one another, and in addition, the British began an upset among the Native Americans, causing them to mobilize for war against the U.S., prompting Congress to declare war in 1812. The War of 1812 occurred in 3 regions of the U.S. 1, the Great Lakes region, where Tecumseh led his followers against the U.S. and was killed during the Battle of Thames in 1813, which led to the collapse of his Shawnee Confederation. 2, along the eastern seaboard of the 13 original colonies, where the British set fire to the White House in 1814. After the burning of Washington, Americans fled the capital, where troops gathered at Fort McHenry in Baltimore, Maryland, to defend any further British invasion. During the Battle of Baltimore in September of 1814, American forces held back both land and sea invasions by the British, even killing one of their generals in the process, which later inspired Francis Scott Key to write a poem and became our national anthem and the lyrics for the Star-Spangled Banner. And last, in the South, where Andrew Jackson defeated the Red Sticks at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in Alabama in 1814, which ended the Creek War. Then, ultimately, defeating the British at the Battle of New Orleans on January 8, 1815, when the British, capturing the city due to its port along the Mississippi River, tried to take over the Louisiana Territory. Andrew Jackson arrived in New Orleans on December 1, 1814, and discovered the city was defenseless. Because of the condition of the city, he illegally declared martial law on December 16, 1814, and placed every able-bodied man under his military authority. It was an unprecedented move because Jackson, who was only a general, had no authority to do so, and an action that would later lead to ramifications by the time the battle that took place at Chalmette was over. Although peace negotiations had already been made to end the war in the city of Ghent in the United Netherlands, present-day Belgium, on December 24, 1814, which officially took effect in February of 1815 with the Treaty of Ghent, news had not reached either side in the South, and the battle commenced in New Orleans on January 8, 1815. Jackson was able to gather men ready to fight by his side, a very diverse group consisting of untrained, ordinary citizens, militiamen, frontiersmen, natives of the Choctaw Nation, free blacks, and eventually the famous outlaw pirate, John Lafitte's Barratarian Pirates, who all played major roles that led Jackson to victory over the British fleet. Which some believe, without Lafitte's contributions, Jackson may have very well lost the battle, which would have changed the course of American history as we know it. Lafitte was a French privateer, later turned pirate, that operated in the Gulf of Mexico, where he knew the waterways extremely well and the wetlands of Louisiana better than anyone. He arrived in New Orleans with his brother Pierre in 1805 and operated a warehouse where they dealt in smuggled and stolen goods that the city's merchants depended on for their comfort and livelihood. But when the U.S. government issued strict regulations, the Lafitte brothers moved their base of operations to Barataria Bay, a further region in the Gulf near Grand Isle, where they could better hide their illegal operations, and eventually began the process of stealing goods themselves, paving their way into piracy, and to then smuggle back the goods into the hands of the local merchants in New Orleans. And for years, authorities looked the other way, never trying to intervene or stop this profitable process. That is until Thomas B. Robertson enters the picture. The acting governor of Louisiana in 1810 denounced Lafitte as a brigand, an outlaw who needed to be stopped for infesting the coast with his illegal smuggling operations, which did not sit well with the city's merchants who were dependent on the illegal goods. By the time the British began invading in 1812, they had a huge advantage, a large and powerful naval fleet, a disadvantage of the U.S. military, who had very little naval power. Lafitte, who knew the seas well and the operations within it as a successful pirate and shipwrighter, and who knew the waterways of the Gulf of Mexico and Mississippi River better than anyone, he eventually became a privateer and played a major role in defeating the British Royal Navy during the Battle of New Orleans. During the British invasion of New Orleans in 1815, it was Lafitte that warned Jackson he was approached by a British commander that tried an ultimatum: either join forces with them and surrender any loot stolen from British ships or suffer the consequences, that they would level the island of Barataria, where Lafitte was not only the leader of its inhabitants, but where his headquarters of operations existed. But Lafitte stayed smart and only told the commander he would think about it. Instead, he warned the U.S. about a British invasion, and when he met with Andrew Jackson, he would help under the condition that he and his men be pardoned of all their crimes. In late December of 1814, the night before the Treaty of Ghent was signed, Jackson and around 2,000 men led a surprise attack against a British camp located 9 miles south of New Orleans. However, the British managed to fight off Jackson's forces with casualties on both sides, causing Jackson to retreat. After this, on New Year's Day in 1815, the British retaliated. Jackson's encampment was attacked by heavy artillery and bombardment, but surprisingly, the British fell due to heavy American counterfire. Right before the actual battle in early January, reinforcements began arriving on both sides. This increased Jackson, still outnumbered by the British troops, to an additional 2,000 more men, with the British forces increasing to over 8,000. Jackson and his men started fortifying near the Rodriguez Canal, which branched off the Mississippi River roughly 5 miles south of New Orleans. They built a 7-foot-tall rampart and gave it a nickname, Line Jackson. This barrier stretched from the Mississippi to the marsh, and they knew this would be an impossible feat for the British to traverse. It is here where he made a famous speech to his soldiers.
Here we shall plant our stakes, and not abandon them until we drive these redcoat rascals into the river or the swamp.
One thing you must understand about Andrew Jackson is that during the American Revolution, he was a young boy who came to hate the British not only for his patriotism, but for personal reasons too. He blamed the death of his mother on them after she began working non-stop nursing the sick and wounded American soldiers, which caused her to contract cholera and die, leaving him an orphan at the age of 14. In 1781, the same year he lost his mother, Jackson and his brother Robert were both taken as prisoners. A British officer ordered him to polish his boots, and when Jackson refused, the enraged officer drew his sword, slashing Jackson's left hand to the bone and gashed his head, leaving scars that he carried for the rest of his life. On January 8, 1815, the day of the battle, British Lieutenant General Edward Pakenham devised a strategy for a two-part frontal assault against Jackson and his men. Their first part involved a small force charged with crossing the west bank of the Mississippi River to seize an American battery and the taking of their guns and turn them on the Americans to assist the frontal attack. The second part involved a larger force of 5,000 men to charge forward towards Rodriguez Canal, where the fortification of Jackson's men was set up. Pakenham saw the fog on the morning of January 8th as an advantage to try and overwhelm Jackson's forces and as the perfect timing to execute his plan. The British charged toward the canal near the swamp and were met with cannon fire by Jackson's men, killing British Colonel Robert Rennie, causing his men to retreat. When the fog lifted as the sun rose, Jackson's gunmen could clearly see their enemies and a barrage of gunfire erupted. Cannon fire successfully split the British line in several places. Pakenham, who had seriously underestimated the power of the marksmanship of Jackson's troops and had arrogantly put himself in the line of fire with his own men, also fell victim and was killed on the battlefield that day. Jackson's unit lost less than 70 men. The battle was over in only 30 minutes and a major victory for the U.S., although some considered it a stalemate, due to both sides not receiving the message that the war had ended before the battle had begun. Immediately after the defeat, the locals implored Jackson to heed reports of a peace treaty he was just now learning of, and to lift military curfews and restrictions, but he refused to comply until he was certain the British Army had left the Gulf region and would not budge until he received official word from Washington that the war was over. When a newspaper editorial criticized him for his actions, accusing him of what some considered bullying tactics against the local French population, Jackson had the writer, who happened to be a state senator, arrested for mutiny. A federal judge, Dominic A. Hall of the District Court of Louisiana, tried to intervene, so Jackson had him arrested too. He also banished the judge from military jurisdiction, despite having the authority to do so. In March of 1815, When official news reached Jackson that the war was over, he swiftly lifted martial law in the city. But within days, Jackson received a summons from the federal judge he had arrested, and he was denied a jury to hear his case. Instead, his decided fate was left up to the judge, and Jackson was found guilty for contempt of court and fined $1,000. The men that fought by his side made it known that they were not too happy with this result, but Jackson quietly paid the fine before departing the federal courthouse, where the hotel stands today. After his presidency, his friends mounted a campaign to have the fine refunded to him, and in early 1844, shortly before his death in 1845, President John Tyler signed the joint congressional resolution to refund Jackson with interest. Eventually, the federal courthouse was torn down and a hotel built in its place, named in his honor, the Andrew Jackson Hotel. It is widely believed by many that the hotel is haunted, primarily by the 5 boys that lived in the orphanage, who all perished in the Second Great Fire of New Orleans. Many who stay there have proclaimed to hear the laughter of children and sounds of footsteps running around the hallways and in the courtyard, to their belongings going missing or becoming misplaced. Some say the ghost of a lady in white has shown herself to visitors who many believe was either once a former housekeeper there or possibly a caregiver to the young boys who died in the fire. Some have claimed to have seen the apparition of Andrew Jackson himself, but the most popular ghost story said to have occurred here was in the mid-1990s. In 1995, a newly married Ohio couple on their honeymoon learned about the location's history and reputation for being haunted, so they decided to book a room there for the sole purpose of experiencing the paranormal. Apparently, when they experienced nothing of the sort, the couple complained to the staff before checking out that they felt duped, that the reputation that the hotel was haunted was just a gimmick to lure in the curious and paranormal enthusiasts. However, when they arrived back home to Ohio and had their film developed from all the photographs taken on their trip, the last photo they came to in the stack was a picture of the couple sleeping, taken from above a 12-foot ceiling viewpoint that even showed the back of the ceiling fan. It is assumed that the only explanation of how this could happen was that a ghost took the picture as the couple slept. Room 208 is the most popular room people request to book at the hotel. It is believed that one of the boys, named Armand, who died in the 1794 fire, fancies that room. Some believe that during the fire, in an attempt to try and save his life, he was thrown from the second-floor balcony, or that he jumped to his death trying to escape the flames. Nonetheless, that particular room is where he tends to hang out the most. Only, room 208 in the hotel today is not the original room. While visiting this past summer, we discovered that there is another room, which is the only one that is sealed off and the numbers removed. But you can still see the indentations of where they used to be. When we asked reception about why they assigned 208 to another room, we weren't really given a good explanation as to why. It was a quick answer that sometimes the hotel just reassigns the rooms, and that was it. When Teresa and I stayed there, we were in room 204. Where we experienced nothing out of the ordinary, but we did find the original 208, and here's that clip. I'm going to show you something. It's supposed to be the most haunted hotel in New Orleans, and that room 208, which is right across the way, is the room that one of the little orphanage boys that died in the Second Great Fire in 1794 of New Orleans was said to have either jumped or was pushed to try to save his life. Who knows the true story behind that? And but that room 208 is the room that the couple from the 90s from Ohio stayed in, wanting to capture paranormal activity, that got really mad, felt like they were gypped because they didn't get any. But when they got home, because they had, back in 95, we didn't have cell phones and digital cameras yet. The last photo after they got their film developed was of them sleeping from above. They're like 12 feet high ceilings in the rooms, and our room doesn't have a ceiling fan. It does have a chandelier, but apparently there was a photo of the couple sleeping that, of course, they didn't take, and from above, and you can see the back of the ceiling fan. So the story goes. That's what they claim. So, but that's the room 208. But in reality, it's not room 208. I'll show you where room 208 is. And like I said, I believe his name was Bill, but from the Bloody Mary's voodoo shop. He told us that room 208 is a cross. And guess what? Not only does it not have a knob, it's completely sealed off. But look. 208. I have been to New Orleans many times and have had my share of paranormal experiences there. And I believe every night we were there, we walked past a tour group of people that signed up for ghost hunting adventures on the premises. The first night we were there, I caught some strange lights in the courtyard, and once in a while it did seem as objects in our room would be moved, but I never saw, heard, or felt any type of unseen presence. It was a very nice, peaceful, and historic place to stay. Plus, the staff that worked there were very accommodating and pleasant. It is also within walking distance to the various attractions and cuisine, and in the heart of the French Quarter, surrounded by history including the grounds on which the hotel stands today, where 3 main structures have existed for over 200 years. For new content and breaking news stories, please be sure to click the notifications to follow along and be notified when updates are available. Don't forget to like, comment, and please feel free to share. You can also join my Facebook group for True Crime and History Time and follow me on TikTok and Instagram. My usernames for those platforms are @JeriScarborough Official. And as always, thank you for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel.